We are officially live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Weather Center Live. It is 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time here in the Sunshine State of Florida, August 14th, 2024, the day after our 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Charlie having barreled its way through the Central Florida Peninsula, coast to coast, pummeling us back in 2004, Friday the 13th, with hurricane-force conditions on either coastline, exiting out over the northeast quadrant near Volusia County, Daytona Beach, having entered in the fateful Fort Myers, Punta Gorda area. But as we set that behind us now, we have new threats to discuss, not only Hurricane Beryl for a second, Hurricane Ernesto, rapidly intensifying out there over the southwestern Atlantic basin. We are getting close to that rapid intensification criteria. I've been watching the central pressure down to 981 millibars currently, as reported by our reconnaissance aircraft. I believe our Air Force reconnaissance aircraft circling the center of the storm right now. We'll get to that here in a moment. Good evening, everybody. I see the chat is livelier than ever. It's wonderful to see you guys in tonight. Make sure we're nudging the heck out of that like button. Let's get this information out there. We're going to be talking about Ernesto. Gosh, that's how long we've been in between storms. I keep wanting to say Burl, Alberto, Ernesto. There's a lot of O's out there on the table this year, but we're going to be talking about Ernesto first, and then we're going to be setting our sights out there for the rest of the Atlantic, as the thumbnail of the video implies. End of August, I do believe, after the fateful Dr. Gray bell ringing in 6 more days, August 20th, we're going to see a huge turn in our tropical Atlantic. I do believe that is going to finally see ignition, all systems go for the greater Atlantic basin. Our Cape Verde setup will begin to establish itself, and we will see our systems finally working their way through a fairly optimized environment. We'll talk all about that here in a second. I also want to let you guys know, not going to go into the details, and I'm going to be very brief on this, but there are enormous changes coming to the channel starting next month. Enormous. They're big. That's all I'm going to say about that. So beginning September, there's going to be a huge change here on the Weather Center, and I will update you guys as we get closer to the beginning of September, Labor Day weekend. So if you're that faithful to the channel, mark the calendars. We'll have the big announcement coming around then. And yeah, neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and get started. So what we're looking at right now is our Puerto Rico radar. You can see a large majority of Ernesto is off towards the north. I have, I believe, 75 frames on my radar Omega running, so we could see the back end of today's heavy rainfall onslaught brought on by the backside of Ernesto. Here you can see the feeder banding ripping off towards the north here, also impacting a lot of the Dominican Republic as well. We were forecasting a couple days ago that Dominican Republic will feel a lot of the effects, particularly the heavy rainfall and the potential localized flooding with this system. That is still unfolding, but I also wanted to show you guys this really neat phenomena here. So if you notice, we have probably should change the color of the ink so you guys can see it. We have really good gratuitous southerly flow coming right out of the eastern and central Caribbean. And if you notice, as Ernesto lifts off the chart, you can see its outermost rain bands are now well to the north of the Puerto Rican island. Notice that we have that southerly fetch of moisture. And if you look right in through here, right there, I'm going to zoom in. Right where my arrows are, look at these little blips right here, the ground clutter on the radar right there, indicating our higher terrain features. This is a wonderful example of showing you guys that mechanical lift, that orographic lift, as we call it, the mountain chain in the interior portions of Puerto Rico acting like a ramp for our southerly flow, that wind component hitting that area perpendicular to the terrain mountain features right in through here. And what those mountains are doing is acting like a lift, a ramp, forcing the moisture in the low to mid levels to condense, reach their condensation point in the atmosphere, and just produce training thunderstorms and heavy rainfall over the central portions of Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, I've been seeing a lot of video, a lot of posts coming out of there. The winds weren't as catastrophic of an effect or an impact as has been the rainfall. The rainfall and the flooding has been extensive for our friends out there in the Leeward Islands, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, everybody in between, and especially Puerto Rico. Shout out to Kevin Rivera and my relatives out there in Puerto Rico as well. I've heard that Kevin, I spoke with him on X earlier today, fighting the good fight, trying to make sure he keeps the house safe, keeps the house from flooding. I know my relatives out there are doing okay. They hadn't lost power earlier this afternoon, so Lord willing, that is still the status quo out there, especially now that Ernesto is far enough to the north to no longer play a significant role on the weather. However, if we switch on over to the satellite image here we are. This is our GOES full disc east shot. You can see Ernesto is rapidly getting that perfect symmetrical look that you would see with a hurricane. And as a result, we're still going to be seeing large amounts of southerly inflow on the backside of this system, keeping our rain chances fairly elevated, technically speaking, elevated for our folks in Dominican Republic, for Puerto Rico, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, and maybe even some of our Leeward Island neighbors up there furthest up to the north on our Lesser Antilles chain. Right in through this general area, we're going to continue to see that southerly fetch of moisture coming out of the Caribbean. So, sad to say, we're not going to see our rain chances totally dissipate just yet, and then we have a weak tropical wave, a dry wave right in through here that could possibly pop some thunderstorm activity as we go through the hottest portions of the day tomorrow. Otherwise, if you look out across much of the northern hemisphere, at least from this shot, this perspective, we have severe weather ongoing in parts of the upper Midwest, or not the upper Midwest, the northern and central plains. We have our next baroclinic frontal system coming across the Great Plains. I believe Dr. Reed Timmer is out there chasing right now amongst a bunch of other people, chasing the possible tornado threat, the isolated tornado threat for the northern plains. And the reason I bring that up is if you trace where the warm front is all the way down through the south, the upper periphery of Florida, and then out across the Atlantic, look at that deep trough and that wonderful looking frontal signature that's helping to pull Ernesto up and away from affecting the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos Islands. You're going to get out of the woods on this one. You're going to barely miss a close call on this feature, as is the rest of the majority of us here in the mainland United States. So thankfully, our northward track did verify a little early, actually. I think it was last week sometime, folks were predicting that on Thursday we would start to see that northerly pull. It actually happened much sooner than that. It started its northward push yesterday. Today is now Wednesday night, and we are clear of the Caribbean into Atlantic waters, and now Bermuda. We have hurricane watches in effect. We need to be paying very, very close attention to this because we could potentially be facing a major hurricane landfall head-on with this system. Here's a look at our true color visible satellite transition into that shortwave IR as we lose the sun, and you can see Ernesto is really quickly further intensifying, gratuitous pushes and pumps of thunderstorm activity right around the mid to low-level circulations. We are vertically stacked at this point, and it is off to the races. Currently, you can see a little bit of dry air associated with our trough and associated with the front just up to the north here. You can see that front getting pulled down, starting to feel the influence of our cyclonic curvature around Ernesto. This could possibly help us. This might just hurt us. We have a thing called ventilation with these systems, and if they end up in the perfect diffluent quadrant with these approaching troughs, these approaching high-level winds in the uppermost portions of the atmosphere, it can actually help these systems rapidly intensify by removing extra mass, extra energy, just kind of turbocharging the outflow from the core of the system, helping to bring out that latent heat exchange to the next level. We've seen it with other systems plenty of times, especially our folks in our systems, I should say, in the Gulf of Mexico when they're getting pulled up towards the north and always whatnot. So we're going to have to wait and see. I really do think we're going to exceed that 115 mile an hour threshold. We'll have to wait and see exactly if Ernesto continues to show very, very, very phenomenal hot towers, cumulonimbus towers closest to the center there. You can see the center is right there, overshooting tops, just readily apparent as the sun went down. The sun angle actually helped to show us where the highest CB points were on that system. So very strong thunderstorms, cold cloud tops indicate that the diurnal maximum phase overnight tonight is going to be pretty much 100% beneficial. There's nothing really working against this system at this point. Here's a look at our latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. 80 mile an hour winds as of the 8 p.m. advisory with central pressure down to 981 millibars. And if you look at the overall movement of this system, we are finally moving at a more generalized pace for these tropical cyclones. This way they can maintain their vertical stack rather well, and they can more or less just kind of see exactly what it can do. And I do anticipate, like I said, 115 miles an hour is our maximum expected intensity right here. I have the interactive track pulled up so we can zoom on in for our folks up there in Bermuda, get a bit of a timetable going on. As of right now, it is 2 p.m. on August 16th. This Friday afternoon is when we could, forecasted by the National Hurricane Center, realize the maximum intensity of Ernesto. I personally think we're underselling it. I really do think we're going to see more out of this system, unfortunately, and Bermuda needs to be hunkered down and locked up tight as this system comes up towards your area. You can see if we zoom in using our interactive track, the island of Bermuda, the little chain there, it's almost like a key island. It's kind of shaped like a moon, a crescent almost. I've been looking at it on actual what's the word I'm looking for? The physical satellite, the physical GPS signature right here. As a matter of fact, they have it there. You can see it. You can see the orientation of the island is almost like a half-moon crescent shape. It's a little bit of a chain, so there's not much to it. And you can see the center of circulation. We are very zoomed in here, guys. So don't take this as, oh, it's going to miss it off towards the west. You guys are good. First of all, this puts us right into the dirty side of the right side of the eye wall, the right front quadrant of the eye wall. And if I zoom out, that is, for all intents and purposes, nearly a direct hit. If you look at the wind core on this system using our interactive map, your strongest winds are immediately to the right side of the system. So, in fact, we almost want this thing to go right over Bermuda or move just to the east of that area. So this is going to be very problematic. We're looking at impacts this weekend, especially if it keeps trucking along at 16 to 18 miles an hour. You can see it is getting ready to knock on their doorstep as the sun comes up on Saturday. This is 2 a.m. Saturday morning, winds of 110 miles an hour, gusting easily up to Category 4 strength, 120 to 130 miles an hour. And then as it passes just to the immediate west, we're talking 10, 20 miles off the coast. We're still looking at major hurricane force conditions as this moves through. And again, I am not sold that this thing is going to stick at 115 miles an hour. If we do get a bit more of interference included or brought on by our long wave trough and that frontal chain, that unseasonable cold frontal boundary that's coming across that some people are actually exaggerating, saying falls here. No, that's calm down. Gosh, it's like one way or another. It's hurricanes, you're exaggerating. With frontal systems, we're all of a sudden in winter time. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But anyways, we could see a little bit more interference brought on by the introduction of that trough and the temperature gradient associated with it, but I just don't think so, especially if it comes together and continues to exhibit the strengthening that it's been taking on as the sun has set and we enter that diurnal maximum phase. D-max, to keep it short, usually starts a few hours after sunset, around 10 to 11 o'clock p.m., and then exists all the way until a couple of hours after sunrise is when these systems will really thrive and strengthen overnight, taking advantage of the internal combustion engine, that energy cycle that goes on within the core of the storm, since that's where a lot of that instability in the low levels and that convergence is going to be confined as the rest of the environment around it, as the sun goes down, it cools. So as a result, we're just going to take full advantage. That chimney effect is going to go through the roof. Solid model agreement. We still want to watch out for Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Eastern Atlantic Canada could take a very, very close shave from a transitioning tropical to extratropical frontal system with jet support as it moves up towards the north-northeast. However, lots of ensemble and track guidance convergence right over top Bermuda. So Bermuda, you need to be ready to rock and roll, literally, because this thing is coming and is going to be there by Friday night into Saturday morning. And here's another reason why, here's another reason why I do think this feature definitely has enough of an opportunity to rapidly intensify consecutively and consistently over the next 72 hours as it moves through Bermuda and even further than that. If you look at our water temps here, we have such a huge warm dome, conducive for not only tropical organization, but tropical sustainment all the way up into the mid-latitudes. We're talking the latitude line of 40 degrees north, probably topping out at around like 42, 43 degrees north latitude, all the way well into the mid-latitudes where our non-tropical cyclones come working their way across with the jet stream. That's how far north latitude we've seen that hot dome of oceanic temperatures reach. You can see just looking at the color coding here and referring to our legend off to the right-hand side, subside, anything from the yellow shading and up is conducive for tropical development and tropical sustaining, if you will, or organization. And that is well to the north of Bermuda. So there's nothing really stopping this thing from just continuing to intensify unless, like I said, that trough can provide it with enough cool, dry air off the continental U.S., as well as mix up the barotropic nature of our tropical cyclone. That vertical stack, the uniform vertical stack, cause it to topple a little bit. That could introduce it to the interference it needs to kind of pull what Lee did last year. It bottomed out at a Cat 3, just looked ragged, rough, and then just continued to weaken from there. So here's a look at our super ensembles before we move on to the latter half. You can see again, phenomenal agreement. At this point in time, everybody in Bermuda needs to be locked up tight, ready to go for Saturday morning. Friday night into Saturday morning. Friday night, your conditions will go downhill. You will start to see feeder band activity. Your tropical storm force winds will likely begin to arrive as the features wind field continues to expand as we go through Friday night just after sunset. And then through the day on Saturday, especially Saturday morning into the lunch hour, is when you're really going to be getting the hammer brought down on you by Ernesto. So you definitely need to be ready, have all your preparations in place. The hurricane warning will likely go out late tomorrow, if not immediately after that when we wake up on Friday morning. I would imagine they're probably going to issue the warning as early as they can to get as much lead time as possible to get everybody ready to go out there. In fact, I'd almost recommend if you have the money and you're watching from out there, you may as well just go take a quick vacation elsewhere just to be on the safe side. Because regardless, looking at how close the track density is, it's either going to miss you just to the immediate left or just to the immediate right, if not go right over top of you. And regardless, you're going to be smack dab in hurricane conditions, very heavy rainfall, very, very rough surf. The storm surge is going to be an issue. And as you saw, it's a tiny area. So there's only so much wiggle room out there. We have less area to work with in comparison to even some of our lesser Antilles down there. So hold on tight, Bermuda. We're going to be watching closely for you guys as we go through the day on Friday and into Saturday. If you are watching from Bermuda, if this video does happen to get to you, leave me a comment, reach out somewhere to make contact, open up a line of dialogue, ask as many questions as you got, and we'll go from there. Here's a look at our European 12 Zulu on the left and our 18Z Icon on the right, and you can see both of these model solutions that I have pulled up. The Euro on the left misses Bermuda just a nudge to the left, to the west, putting us in the worst of the storm. If you look at the 18Z Icon, the German model, has given it a subtle nudge to the right, and now has it missing just to the right, the east of Bermuda, whereas the 12 Zulu had a direct hit for the island. Regardless, this is too close for comfort. We're likely going to have a intensifying, if not bottoming out, major hurricane knocking on your doorstep right around the same time. This is valid for 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Both charts indicate that the eye wall will be just essentially marinating right over top of Bermuda. So this is going to be rough. We're definitely in for some chop, as they would say out there in the aircraft and the flight industry. And then you can see the European model takes it right up into Atlantic Canada, landfalling as a potential transitioning tropical cyclone to non-tropical, picking up jet support, and you can see the acceleration in the winds just upstream of it coming off of our east coast of the United States, indicating that it is pulling high pressure and cool, dry air off the continental U.S., eastern and central Canada, helping to feed the low cyclone and turn it more into a baroclinic system as opposed to just a traditional warm core tropical system. It kind of looks like the Icon, even though the 18 Zulu goes out to 120 hours, the Icon is thinking more or less the same thing. If it keeps that rapid acceleration off towards the north-northeast, we are going to see a Atlantic Canada landfall as well. So we got to be prepared for a situation very reminiscent of a Category 1, Category 2 type hurricane, whereas we are going to be seeing that wind field expanding. The winds are going to come on more steadily as opposed to more rapidly with a vertically stacked, isolated tropical system. So mixed bag, if you will. Very, very heavy mixed bag up there for Atlantic Canada. We're getting three birds with the same stone. We saw impacts in the Lesser Antilles and our Eastern Caribbean neighbors. Bermuda looks to take a head-on 1-2 punch or a solid Mike Tyson left hook to the face before this thing finally can come in for an uppercut up there into Eastern Atlantic Canada. and it's not going to be a good time. We got to get this one up and out as quick as possible. And I posted it on my Instagram earlier. For everybody out there who's saying, there's a hype storm, there's a fish storm, good for you. In fact, I would honestly turn that rhetoric into, I'm glad this is staying out to sea, because if this thing came in and whacked us somewhere along the East Coast or in the Gulf of Mexico, especially with as prime of a conditions and prime a setup as we have, we're counting our blessings right now. And unfortunately, somebody's got to take it. Bermuda's taking it. The Caribbean already took it, and they're taking it like a champ. And so, yeah, maybe we'll catch the next one. Who's to say? All right. Roxanne Hudson, thank you tremendously for the $5 donation. I do appreciate that, and thanks for the chat. Rocking and rolling right now. Let's go ahead and get those likes up just a little bit, guys. If you can take a split second to tap that like button, nudge it a little bit, just a gentle nudge, get those likes up, and we'll go from there. We're going to transition to a bit more long range. We're going to talk why it is our Atlantic signal has been so lackluster with Ernesto's development and then thereafter. We're finally seeing a bit of a sudden uptick. I will say sudden, because yesterday and days precluding today, this evening with you guys, the long-range signal for any kind of ensemble deterministic model support for any tropical development out there in the Atlantic across the board from the Gulf all the way to the coast of Africa has been nil to none. And then all of a sudden, we're starting to see it as we get the proper orientation and reorientation, I should say, of our African monsoonal trough. The intertropical convergence zone can finally wander its way back down from such a high latitudinal position. And I'm going to talk you through that just a little bit right now, because I've been doing a lot of research in the background as to what the heck is dorking up our MDR right now and why we're still in a bit of a, waiting and seeing phase, and it's going to lull people into a false sense of security, and I really can't emphasize enough. It may not be gangbusters to where we're looking at 7 storms at the same time on the map, but we absolutely cannot take our foot off the gas of staying prepared and keeping our heads on a swivel, because the signals are starting to return, and I think they're going to go up fast, especially as we go through this weekend and we get into the last week and a half-ish of August. So right now, if you look, our African monsoon is in full effect. It's huge. We just have robust moisture and thunderstorms across much of interior Africa. To put it into perspective, it is all the way up from the Middle East down into South Africa. We are seeing large amounts of multiple MCS features that would typically result in tropical waves. It is now just a huge swath of difluent flow, a huge swath of low-level convergence, creating nonstop rain showers, cloud cover, latent, or I should say cooling brought on by the condensive and evaporative processes going on pretty much 24/7 in here. And my working theory is that's kind of what's resulted in our ITCZ and our little freight train of waves being bumped up towards the north, coming off at such a high latitude. Because if you think about it, the way the ITCZ and the monsoonal trough setup works, regardless of where you are on the globe in the tropics, it follows the sun angle. We've talked about it before. It follows the direct immediate incoming radiation from the sun, and that's what helps to create those northeasterly winds and those southwesterly winds that collide, and there's your convergence zone, that convergent boundary in between the colliding air. And so as a result, with all this cooling possibly going on, and with all this moisture here keeping things relatively cooler for parts of Africa where our African easterly jet is still screaming along out of the east, I think that's why our greatest area of temperature discontinuity at the surface is up here. And I mean, it's a working theory. It's not rooted in science, but it makes sense. So that's where our African easterly jet is dropping the waves. We're plopping them off just to the immediate west or north of the CV Islands, the Cabo Verde Islands, and they're coming out of a very unfavorable setup. On top of that, because of this deep trough and this thing up here near Iceland and up towards the northwest coast of Europe, induced by Debbie. Debbie's still dorking things up out there. Debbie dorking it up, leaving us holding the bag. That's what's more or less pulled us into a pseudo fall-like pattern and has bumped. You can see it right in through here, this clockwise spin there. An anticyclone parked over our Azores Islands, over Spain and Portugal, with a little bit of an upper-level trough and upper low sinking down into northern Africa and through Europe. I think that's also what's really messing up our Atlantic right now. We're still used to seeing some fairly low latitude waves, a peaceful pattern, but since we just essentially jumped forward into fall, that's why we're we're kind of caught in a snag. There's a chink in the chain, as they would say on some of our old classic Hollywood movies out there. So not only are we still seeing continental dry air coming off of Africa and Europe, but our waves are coming through that continental dry air. They're not inside this robust equatorial moisture. And then we also have the subsidence brought on by our high pressure, our anticyclone to the north. So that's kind of what's squashing them before they even have a chance to get going. As Debbie, the remnants of Debbie, and this enormous jet max ripping across Europe can finally make its way far enough downstream, we're going to close the pattern up. And I had a conversation with my buddy Mike over on Instagram earlier today. This entire season has been hashtag give and take. Hashtag give and take. Because right now, everyone's out there celebrating, saying, well, looks like the big brains in meteorology were wrong. Bust season. That's going to come back and bite us in the butt. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily immediately mean that we're going to have 50 named storms at the same time. Problem is, though, we're going to see our entire Atlantic pattern reset. It's going to be quiet out there. We actually would want more named storms out there so we can see 2010, 2023, to where systems just keep going up and out, up and out, up and out, just like we saw last year with all of our favorite fish storms. In this case, Ernesto is going to come through, kind of erase the pattern. It's kind of like disconnecting your negative battery cable from your car to do a hard ECU reboot, a hard reset, and it's going to allow the pattern to close up, restart, and then we're going to start to see those waves come across. So we're going to have to keep a very close eye out as we go over the next couple of weeks and into early September. Here's a look at the infrared. That was water vapor previously. You can see all this monsoonal moisture just embedded through the heart of Africa. And even on the infrared here, you can see that our hottest area is right in through there. Sharp contrast between where the surface daytime heating is unable to take place, because of the thunderstorms that are just ongoing steadily throughout the day and even into the overnight hours. So that's where your gradient is, and that likely could be why our intertropical, the tropical front, the ITF, the ITCZ, whatever you want to call it, is running to the north, kind of ridging over where all this potentially cooler, moist air is. That's going to go away here very soon. And with that being said, here we go. So there is the 96-hour point, 120-hour point. There goes Ernesto. And then finally, just in time for the second to last week and then the last week of August, notice how now that things are finally reorienting. See that first one? See this signal right here coming off at such a high latitude? This is flipping almost 22 to 25 degrees north latitude. That is wrong. You never usually see waves coming off that far to the north. Likely, again, a response to all that tropical and monsoonal convection and rainfall occurring in Africa, messing with our easterly jet. But then if you fast forward to 216 hours and then 240 hours, now we're sinking back down into the main development region, into the tropics at 264 hours and 288 hours. Now we have a few different areas that we're going to have to just kind of monitor. We have a couple of waves that a few of our long-range models and ensembles are picking up on, and then we have this sneaky little thing that has been showing up recently on our GFS deterministic model, and a couple of our EPS ensembles and Canadian ensembles, or Euro and Canadian ensembles, are picking up on this little sneaky feature. So nothing concerning, nothing glaring, but we're still going to have to keep a close eye out on it. Here is the European ensembles here, and you can see after the waves can stop coming off at 25 degrees latitude, once you see those little spaghetti members in the eastern Atlantic start coming off at a more favorable position, you see that? Then immediately we're off to the races, and there's little ensembles everywhere. We got Caribbean runners moving through the Greater Antilles. They don't need that right now. We have our sneaky ensemble members down here putting Florida back in the bullseye randomly from that one wave we saw on the probabilities a moment ago. And then you can see we have fairly decent agreement, subtle agreement, but decent agreement that we are going to have waves moving through the pattern. And yes, the Lesser Antilles are still on the immediate front lines for these systems as they work their way through the main development region of the Atlantic and potentially enter, if not just move barely to the north, like the initial precursor wave of Debbie did, just to the immediate north of our Leeward Islands and the Greater Antilles of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, into the Turks and Caicos. Now, why are we worrying? Why are we freaking out even though there's nothing out there? David, there's nothing going on. This is a bust season. Stop trying to talk your way through it. Well, like I'd mentioned, look at how Ernesto moves up through Bermuda, up towards Atlantic Canada, and then finally gets pulled into the greater Atlantic with the jet. Here's our trough, a very sharp amplitude ridge over Conus. This is the jet stream right in through there, with Ernesto becoming a shortwave trough and a very strong one at that, that's going to help to reopen the pattern, put us back into a zonal flow. And look at how our anticyclone wastes no time moving from over in this general area back to the central Atlantic. And as a result, boom, even this far out, this is August 21st. I'm not expecting we're going to have a system on the board by August 21st. I think that's still a little early. But regardless, you look at this pattern, the only thing saving us is the fact that there is no system on the map. If you look at these prevailing winds at 850 and 700 millibars, this is our 700 millibar geopotential height, so we're looking at the 700 millibar level in the atmosphere. This is predominantly where your deep layer steering comes from. This would definitely take our waves and either throw them right into the Caribbean or take them just to the immediate north and possibly become an issue again for Bermuda, Atlantic Canada, or the immediate northeast or the eastern United States. You go a little further in time, and as that anticyclone finally broadens out and we lose all this extra tropical influence that's dorking up our jet stream and creating all these fall and pseudo-winter-like jet maxes to help deepen our Rossby waves, the long wave ridges and troughs, now that we are in a very zonal pattern reminiscent of the summertime, look at how our Bermuda Azores high is just cooking out there, just laying out, taking in the sun out there over the greater Atlantic basin. This here screams in my face either East Coast Florida landfall, Gulf of Mexico system, or an East Coast United States system. This is not a, quote, fish storm setup, period. Like I said, it's a give and take. We're sitting pretty. All the folks out there with a laptop, a camera, or a phone on their X can say, bus season, it's quiet. This is not good. All it'll take is one storm, and we're going to be realizing another landfall more than likely. Nothing on the immediate horizon upstream. There's a nice anticyclone out there over the Atlantic. Really good prevailing easterlies across the tropics. So that thing is coming in with a call over the Gulf of Mexico coastline in the southeast. So if there's going to be any divergence in the track, it's going to be somewhere either right over Florida and the east coast of the U.S. or into the Gulf of Mexico. So we got to be careful. We definitely got to be careful. The GFS looks even more concerning, to tell you the truth. If you look, the 18Z GFS, I should say the long-range GEFS, the ensembles, the controlled prevailing flow out there for the mid-levels, looks even worse for our folks out there in the Gulf Coast. Again, no immediate systems, nothing on the immediate horizon over the next 5 to 7 days. National Hurricane Center isn't pinging anything. I'm personally not pinging anything. I wouldn't sweat it too much. We're going to have a nice little lull. Once again, let everything calm down and come back to normal out there for the Atlantic, just in time for the trailing end of August. This is valid for 18Z on Sunday, so not this Sunday, but the following Sunday, to give you guys a timetable. We got a break. We definitely have a break. It's another one of those instances where we got to reload the double-barrel shotgun and kind of just take a break. We don't have sleight of hand. We're not going to rapidly reload or anything like that. We're going to take our time, and then when it's time to pump out another system, we need to be very careful that this pattern isn't in place. Because if you look, this is once again showing fairly zonal flow through the northern hemisphere, through North America into Europe, and as a result, our Atlantic anticyclone, the Bermuda Azores high, is just going to spread out. That's why I've been mentioning to you guys with what goes up always has to come down. Whenever there's a trough, there's strong ridging on either side. Whenever there's a strong ridge, there is strong troughing on either side. We really don't need zonal flow out there as we go into the peak of the hurricane season. If we have zonal jet flow at the peak of summer into the peak of hurricane season, the climatological peak is the first week-ish of September. Zonal flow, meaning our jet is fairly weak, fairly diffuse, flowing west to east. You can see here coming out of the west, flowing east on this chart. As a result, all of our steering patterns, our deep layer steering, are just going to flatten out. Everything's going to be pancaked. And you can see from the coast to Africa, if we get a long tracker, you can see the easterly flow just goes east, 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 and then finally gets pulled up like so. So if we want to avoid another barrel, this is not the way to do it. That's why I said, truthfully, we can laugh and mock the forecasters from CSU, NOAA, etc., thinking that the hyperactive title for this hurricane season was wrong. The problem is we kind of need it to be right, because if it was right, we would have another system following right behind Ernesto, and then another one moving up even more than that, and another one, and it would just be 2010, 2023, like a pseudo El Nino pattern. The problem with that is we don't have that going on, so everything is going to go back to normal. You can see right here how all the energy from Ernesto and all the prior energy from Debbie now are accelerating like a missile over into Europe, affecting their weather, has brought down lots of cool, dry air from Canada, from the poles into the mid-latitudes. I know it looks like everything's moving west to east, but you have to take into equation that we have very large wind flow around these systems, which is exactly why I have the winds here at 850 pulled up for our next chart. If you look right here, I'll go to the point where Ernesto has moved past Bermuda up towards Atlantic Canada. If you look at the winds here, we have our cyclonic flow around Ernesto pulling lots of moisture up out of the south. But then if you notice on the left side, the west side of Ernesto, we have really good northerly winds. And if you think about this from a fluid perspective, we have, I'll even use different colors for you guys. We have all this cooler air up to the north in the poles, in the mid-latitudes, relatively cooler air because this is the, the summertime, obviously. We're not going to have 30, 20-degree temperatures, snowstorms. So, when I say cold air, think about it from a relative perspective in comparison to the 100-degree weather we have down here in Florida. We're looking at maybe 50s, 60s. Big difference. It's still enough to really cause some chaos in your pattern and create some density and, mass differences in the atmosphere. But, and then I'll go ahead and use my red here. We have our deep tropical equatorial heat down here, and this is why these fish storms are such difficult forecasting pieces, or they're very difficult to forecast for, because if you look, if I go ahead and take my arrow and make it even bigger, and I start to show you guys all that northerly flow coming out along the west side of our system, and then the southerly flow coming up out of the equatorward areas on the right side, the east side of the system, what that's going to do is it's going to pull cool air marinating up north down south, and it's going to take our warm air from the equator and pull it up towards the north. And that's why if you come over, I'll clear the ink, and you come back over here to the very beginning of the run, and that's why we have a nice ridge out over the eastern Atlantic, and then we have a deep trough. You see that? We have a trough here, and then a ridge here. That's indicating warm air surging to the north, cool air surging down towards the south, and it's all thanks to our baroclinic systems that are causing our isolated tornadoes over the Great Plains. And then we have our tropical features bringing up that warm air. You guys seeing the big picture here? You know why it is that we have winter storms during the winter? There's more cold air. Why do we have hurricanes only in the summer? There's more warm air. What are our frontal systems made of? Cold air. What are our hurricanes made of? Warm air. What do the hurricanes do in the equator to keep things in balance? They suck up all the hot energy and bring it north. And then our frontal systems take all that dense cold air that would just freeze the poles, and they bring it down south to keep everything in as best of an equal state as possible. That's weather in a nutshell. But anyways, that's why we would need more systems coming up out of the Atlantic and just shooting up and out so we can keep this protective trough in place over the East Coast. If we don't have this exchange of temperatures from the south and out of the north happening, what goes on is the pattern levels out. See that? See how we just kind of flatline? We went from advection and advection because of the changing in the winds and the different features pulling the energy from the north and out of the south to, boom, just west to east, because there's nothing changing our temperature. So now, to keep us in equilibrium, we can't have troughs, we can't have too strong of ridges. So as a result, we're left with these pancake-looking systems out there. See the difference? I'll click back from the GFS to the Euro at the very end. This is the start of the pattern. We have all this tomfoolery going on everywhere. A deep trough over the east, a weird-looking anticyclone over the eastern Atlantic with those jagged-looking waves coming off of Africa. And then you go to the end. Once we clear the board, we reset. Like I said, push the reset button on your Nintendo. Boom. Because there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there stirring the pot. We have all of our cool air back up towards the north. Everything is back in that equal state. Everything is calm. So our cool air is to the north, and our warm air is down to the south. And as a result, we are left with very, very equal Geostrophic flow. We are at that quasi-geostrophic balance is the meteorological nerdy term for it. In this basic, we're zonal, we're calm. There's no amplitude to our waves. It's like a calm ocean surface. Our winds in the mid-latitudes are flowing west to east as they should, and our easterlies are flowing east to west in the tropics as they should based on just the overall rotation of the Earth. The problem with that is the next time we get a tropical system, and I'm not saying a whole freight train, major this, extreme that. I'm just saying if we get one system like Beryl back in June and July, it's just going to move this way. That's all it's going to do. And that's your basic meteorology right there. It doesn't take fancy science, fancy terminology, fancy jargon, and all these other... I mean, look at this. I mean, just look at the winds. I'll leave it right there. This is August 28th as we're getting ready to end the month of August and move into the peak of the hurricane season. I'll just leave it right there. And if you look, we have a giant donut-looking anticyclone. And look at these strong easterly winds all through here. So if anything forms up and decides to come off of Africa and actually decides to grow a pair and develop as opposed to being a weak, dry, nothing to it wave, that's coming at us. It's going to hit the Lesser Antilles. It's going to either barrel through the Caribbean and come up into the Gulf, or it's going to pull a Francis Jean, or maybe escape up towards the north and become a mid-Atlantic issue. Regardless, come after me in the comments. Come after me. Say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's right there. It's staring us in the face. And if you don't want to listen to it, then, you know, what can I do? That's okay. The same thing with the European ensembles at the 12Z. If you look at the general wind flow, our steering flow, it's the winds, then the pressure that steers our system. So if you want to know generally where your tropical cyclone is going, look at the winds. Then you can, you know, if you don't want to look just at the winds, if the winds are kerfluffled and they're a mess in all sorts of different directions, then you can look at your pressures and your heights. But again, even the European model, King Euro, just east to west flow, boom. So even if they're just weak tropical waves, they're coming across and they're moving west. Lesser Antilles, be on the lookout. You're not done with this hurricane season. The Caribbean is not done with this hurricane season. The United States, if we don't get a storm immediately following Ernesto, the United States are not done with this hurricane season. Period. All we need is one. All we need is one. Even the Canadian model, I have the Canadian model up here just to further reinforce the point I'm trying to make. If you look, after that system clears out, you see all that cold air getting pulled down on the west side. You can see it coming in too. As Ernesto comes up, I can't show you because obviously my hands, I can't touch screen the picture, but if you look, as I take this through time, you can see how Ernesto's low pressure and what's left of Debbie in this jet max moving up to the south of Greenland and Iceland, all that cold air is following like a wave back behind it. That's why they're called Rossby waves. They're moving through. Why are we... Oh, wow, we're lagging for some reason. What the heck? Why are we lagging? There we go. Okay, now we're not lagging anymore. I don't know what just happened there. I hope we're not going to lag out of the stream all of a sudden. But anyways, just in case we do lag out, I'm going to stop rattling off all this steering stuff. If you look at the Canadian model, that cool air gets pulled in, then Ernesto plunges west or plunges east into Europe, and there's nothing out there. So our pattern is just going to go back to zonal flow, and we're going to see that easterly trade wind component across the tropics. And the only detrimental piece about that is if you come over to, we'll go over to the shear component, for example, there's not going to be a lot of shear out there. We're going to be looking at a fairly optimal environment, climatological peak of hurricane season. So even if we get one or two storms out there, they're going to blow up and they're going to be coming west. So that's that. That's all I got for you guys. We have Ernesto, Bermuda this weekend. It's game time for you guys. We're going to have to wait and see if it's going to make a run for Atlantic Canada. And then we'll be done with it. And then Francine could do a number on us. Could possibly give us a black eye if we wait long enough to get Francine to develop. So, yeah. As a matter of fact, I believe PM dropped the link in the chat. Let me go ahead and open it up. I have my notes here, but I'd rather just go ahead and open it up here so you guys can see. If you're a Floridian, we have another tax holiday coming in right on time for the 24th of August. It starts on the 24th and runs through to the peak of the hurricane season, September 6th. All the items you see here in front of you, and I'll zoom in the screen just a little bit on my Adobe PDF. Where is the zoom button? There you go. I'll zoom in a little bit. I'll scroll down. Here's the first list. So, what are the dates and items included in the 2024 Florida Disaster Preparedness Sales Tax Holiday? There will be 2 separate 2-week holiday periods. The first one's already come and gone. The second one is coming towards us within the next 10 days. These are all pieces of equipment, items that you can buy off the shelves at pretty much any grocery store, any wholesale store, department store, warehouse store like BJ Sam's, Costco, etc. Your choice, where they will have 0 tax on these features, all these good old items. So definitely take note of this. Whenever you guys, if you want to snap a picture of this item, if you're a Floridian, if you want to snap a picture of this screen cap so you don't have to search it, PM was gracious enough to drop it in the chat. If you just want to click it, bookmark it, put it on your smartphone, and have that saved for future reference, feel free to do so. But yeah, I would definitely implore you, at least start looking at some of the lesser items on here. Getting cat and dog food for the pets. Definitely make sure that your over-the-counter medications are ready to rock and roll. Make sure you have cat litter and whatnot. I definitely would want to stock up on that. In fact, I got to make a run for cat litter. Willow is all fresh out, as a matter of fact. Make sure you have your classic canned goods, your batteries, anything that's non-perishable that you can keep in the house, and things that won't go bad. Just make sure you have some basic necessities that'll last you a good 48, 72 hours just in case, because honestly, we're not done with this hurricane season. We're not in the peak just yet, and despite how slow it has been to progress, we are still above average. We already are. We really are. We're about to have another major hurricane in the Atlantic, and it's before the climatological peak. Beryl was extreme extra credit. We had Alberto, Chris. We had another hurricane already in the Gulf that hit Florida right on the money as we predicted it would in the beginning of the month of August. So, yeah. We are technically already above average. It's just a matter of time before the sensitive Atlantic basin can finally align historically with what climatology tells us, and then we're going to start seeing the fierce systems coming out there, and hurricanes are going to be a lot more readily apparent. And again, I'm not forecasting that this thing's going to go from 0 to 200 to where we're going to have Francine, GHI, JKL all on the board at the same time. But this is the point in the hurricane season where I do believe we're going to start chiseling away at our named storms. Francine's going to hit the board in probably 2 to 3 weeks. Then we're going to have, what's G? Is it Gustav? Who's G this year? Someone in the chat let me know. I forget. I have not looked beyond Francine just yet because we're still waiting on Francine. But somebody in the chat, let me know what G is. And then my superstitious side is very, very curious for Isaac. I am so curious for Isaac. I want to see what happens with our I storm this year. Will Florida finally break the I curse, or are we going to get another round of I impacts? Or impacts with a capital I. But that's all I got, guys. It's 8:46. What questions do I have before we round out the live stream? Thank you for everybody who's tuned in up to this point, who's still watching despite the intermittent lag that we were suddenly blasted with. Gordon, okay, I think Gustav was a historic or an old... Oh, yeah, Gustav was a retired name I was researching a while ago. So Gordon is G. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. So yeah, anybody have any pressing questions? Helene just sounds like it would be a hurricane. Hurricane Helene. Major Hurricane Helene. It's got a really wonderful ring to it. Volume Party Papers, Naz. What does that mean? Hiya, pal. I'm back. Sorry not been for a bit, but glad to see you're still at it, keeping people alert. Absolutely, Thomas Denton. Good to see you. Bulldozer, water with high winds, pushing it. What do you think about the eye that it appears Ernesto is about to try and define? I wouldn't be surprised if we see that area of subsidence take on an eye feature as we wake up tomorrow morning or throughout the day tomorrow. Christine Estrada, you are very welcome. With Ian, I lost my job, ADHD, because of the damage in the area and my field. Finding a new job took a couple months. I believe it. We were whacked hard by Ian back in the day. Ooh, April, Joyce. All of them, all these upcoming names just sound like rough storms to go through. Helene, Isaac, Joyce. I can see all these systems don't have slop names. Like, and forgive me, I know that sounds silly, but Chris sounded like it could have done something, but at the same time, Chris, just Alberto doesn't sound I'm honestly surprised that Ernesto was doing what Ernesto's doing, because remember the last time we saw an Ernesto, it was just this weak, sloppy tropical storm that did come to Florida, but it was a depression by the time it made it there because it bulldozed all through our greater Antilles. But all these next upcoming names, I can see them being retired. They kind of feel, they emanate that I'm going to get retired this year kind of name, or like they're on their way to retirement. They got the retirement orders from the military and they're getting ready to punch out for the last time. Evo is not ready to chase, but I need to nail down when I will get her ready to chase. That's part of the big things that are going to be happening. I'm telling you guys, this channel is going to look a lot different. This channel is going to operate a lot different next month, starting next month. I'm telling you now, you'll see. It's going to be different. We are 4 storms away from the letter I. Storm sounds about mid to late September for that letter. We will see. Rodney, I agree. It's Isaac, I-S-A-A-C. Irma was my first hurricane. Irma was rough for me. I believe it. Caleb the Gamer. Don't forget your important papers. I agree. Roxanne. Braden, next time, remind me please, buddy. Next time we'll do Climate Reorganizer. Or Reanalyzer. Hurricane Butt Kiss. Pfft. Yeah, let's do it. Next time if we get the big one, PM, I'm gonna need a team. I'm definitely gonna need a team. There's no way I'm going in by myself. Do you think we will see a Cat 5 this season? I don't wish one on you, but do you believe one will hit someone at some point? Well, technically, Beryl already did. If you're talking mainland U.S., it is definitely a potential. It is definitely a potential, especially with how friggin' hot the Gulf of Mexico is. Oh, it will. It definitely will. Nomad Avenue 6, it will. It's good stuff. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely very good stuff, and I'm humbly proud of what's coming. Very humbly proud, and I'm so excited to make the official announcement. I just don't want to put it out into the open year yet, because that's how you jinx things. That's how you allow bad energy into the mix. Oh yeah, there's a number of people headed to Bermuda, that's for sure. Oh, and also, I did change my YouTube name last night, LOL to Gamer, since I do gaming videos. Copy that, Caleb the Gamer. Boring and Natasha would be great names. Sharon Jackson, you're very welcome. Nice job, first-time viewer. Appreciate the long-term planning discussions. Dennis, absolutely, and thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. Definitely do appreciate it. That's another thing I'm going to have to tell you, too. Some of the straight-to abrasive stuff that I can put, I mean, maybe not abrasive, but some of you guys like the candor that I bring to this channel. That's probably going to have to start changing a little bit as we go through September. I'm going to have to start grooming myself. How is La Nina coming along? We're not there yet. We almost snuck into a weak La Nina, Helen, but now we're back up into just a solid, cool neutral. You're very welcome, Nomad Avenue 6. Thank you very much for the continued support, as a matter of fact. I should be thanking you guys. More Gulf than East Central Florida? Regina Bridgeland, what do you mean by that question? Are you saying that we could have more systems in the Gulf versus coming into the east coast of Florida? It's possible. It's possible. When will we come into a full La Nina? Rodney, I'm still sold that we're going to see it end of September into fall. I think that's when La Nina will truly buckle down and finally kick in and sustain itself. We've come very close once. We were at like a negative 0.46, something like that, and we need a negative 0.5 out there on the RONI, the relative oscillation something index. I'm suddenly drawing a blank. The ENSO. That is true. We do need to work on the forum. I forget. Will you be going live if it hits Bermuda? Bermuda, that's on Saturday. I probably will not, actually. Probably will not. I have a lot of plans this weekend. A ton of plans this weekend. A lot of really serious, not serious, but special personal obligations. So I'll probably do an early update, both on Friday. I'll try on Friday, and then Saturday I'll do my very best, guys. I will, but it's going to get a little difficult, a little tedious for the rest of this month, but I'm going to still be working as hard as I can for you guys. Regina, yes, to answer your question, I do think September and October especially, we will see systems in the Gulf. I really do. I would be astonished if we didn't get at least another 2-3 systems in the Gulf of Mexico, particularly as we make the transition back to more homegrown season to where West Caribbean and the Gulf becomes a bit more of a source region. Will Gulf of Mexico warm water bring bad hurricanes by the time of... Yes, Dane Clement. If something gets into the Gulf of Mexico, we could definitely see an explosive rate of intensification, just like we've seen with many systems in the past. Many systems in the past. Didn't Idalia form off the coast of South America? Central America. Came across from the Pacific monsoonal trough, wandered over Central America, and then formed up in the Western Caribbean, and then just shot north. But alrighty, guys, I'm seeing the number of concurrent viewers going down. Let's go ahead and start wrapping up. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience once again tonight. It's always a pleasure getting to talk weather with you all, especially in these live discussions. Thank you very much for all the comments, the questions. If you have additional questions or something new comes to mind, please leave them in the comments section down below. I'll make it a point to get back to you some point in the first half of the day tomorrow. I always make it a point to reply and open up that line of dialogue with you guys. We'll talk to you again soon. Need to figure out whether or not I'm doing a live tomorrow. We shall see, but we'll definitely be live again on Friday to figure things out. If not, we'll do it vice versa. If I'm too obligated and working on personal things in the background on Friday, we'll do something tomorrow for sure. We'll figure it out. I will keep you guys updated. Please consider clicking subscribe if you haven't done so already. Turn it on your notification bell so you don't miss an upcoming update from this channel, from the Weather Center, and consider nudging the like button so we can try to get this information out to a few more viewers, get the information to start circulating, especially as we get towards the back end of August and into the historical peak of the season. That's when I do think the lid is going to come off and we're going to start seeing a bit more repetition in our named storms. So thank you all very much for watching. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. I hope you've had a wonderful first half of the week. I'm going to try to end the live stream before this next round of ads runs. So have a great rest of your evening. Be safe, guys. God bless. And until next time, this is Weather Center Nazari.